here. So main thing, I recently read an article saying that IT and cybersecurity issues are slated to cost organizations in the trillions of dollars in 2021, which is really what triggered us to have this conversation today. One of the main areas that seem to be targeted is the finance organization due to the nature of the data that they protect and have access to. So this webinar is a meeting where we're going to get together some individuals on the finance side. We're getting together our information security group as well. And we're really going to discuss, what the major risks are that could potentially impact your organization, ways to mitigate that risk, and how to work together in your organization between your finance and your information security function to make sure that you're doing the best job possible. We're joined with our panelists today. We've got Joe Manning, Kent Hansen, and Nasir Khan. Joe, if you want to kick off with the introduction of yourself first.
Sure, and thank you, and good morning, everybody. So my name is Joe Manning. I have over 30 years experience in banking. The last 20 years I've spent in IT project management, IT audit, and the last 15 years as Director of Information Security at a large bank here in North America. I've implemented third-party risk management and user computing, data loss prevention programs, and my last role was to run a team of 70 information security professionals to secure every bank application and infrastructure. So I've got a long breadth and depth of information security and IT background. Thank you.
Excellent. Kent, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, good morning, Tracy. Thanks for hosting this event. Kent Hansen, I'm the CFO of Kingsway Financial Services. I joined a little bit over a year ago. I started my career at Ernst & Young as an auditor, and then I went to non-public in various roles in accounting and finance along the way with probably always sort of stay close to technology as well. So look forward to a good discussion here today. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, Nasir.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nasir Khan. I am a Senior Vice President, CIO, and CISO for Consortium Health Plans. And I believe that you may want to know a little bit more about Consortium Health Plans for the context of this discussion than probably me. So CHP is a Blue Cross Blue Shield company. Blue Cross Blue Shield are healthcare providers and payers. And we provide market and sales support to our Blue Cross Blue Shield plans through market insight and deep analytics. Our biggest asset, Consortium biggest asset, is the healthcare claim data we receive from our plans. And CHP is has one of the largest healthcare claim data in US and probably in the world, because we have about 110 million members as a part of our network. So my opinion, my perspective in this forum will be influenced by my environment. And I'm really feel excited to be part of this panel discussion.
Great, thank you. And we're very happy to have all of you here today. Just so everyone in the audience knows, this is going to be an interactive panel. So as I mentioned, make sure to throw your questions in the chat box during the panel discussion. But we're also going to have a couple of polling questions that'll pop up throughout the event. So here's our first one. So question is, do you feel that IT and cybersecurity threats have increased due to the new remote work environment that we're in? Give everyone a minute or two to answer here, and then we'll pop up with the results real quick. And all right. Tess, are you able to show the results? There we go. All right, so it looks like 71% of the audience members think there has been a significant increase, 26% a slight increase, and 3% think it has stayed the same. So that is actually where we're going to lead off with the questions here, because we are in this new remote work environment with COVID, or a lot of companies are. So Now I'm going to throw that question over to the panelists. Joe, would you like to answer first? What are your thoughts on the new remote work?
Sure. I mean, I think we've all come from an environment where we worked in an office space, and that office space had a trusting computing environment. It had a network shell that had endpoints that were inside that shell, and a lot of controls were built to protect the shell from the outside in. And as we've taken all of our computing devices and we've left our workspaces and gone home, we're now using our own Wi-Fi at home. We're using our own computers in some cases, and it's been more difficult to do upgrades and keep our computers strong. And we haven't had the focus that we probably should have on endpoint computing and how the remote world is going to work. And we're also connecting to our third-party service providers through our own internal networks, whereas before we might have had a virtual private network connection from our corporate environment to our third-party service providers. And so there are a lot of additional points where we can see a potential risks increased, such as third-party malware, such as man-in-the-middle attacks, and we've seen higher degrees of ransomware, and we've all seen the news about increasing cyber threats. So I think all of this comes together as a perfect storm in some ways for hacktivists and hackers to come in and try and attack our computers and our networks and our systems. So I think that there is a great increase in the potential risks to our computers and to our computing environments.
Excellent. Kent, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with that. I think it's wonderful that we have this technology that enables us to continue our businesses during this pandemic. I think, if you go back 10 years ago, would we have been able to do the same thing? And it's probably a lot different story. I see Joe shaking his head going, no. But I tend to agree with that. But I think it's wonderful that we have all this technology that enables us to still be connected and do our work. I know a lot of people were concerned about, are people going to be as productive at home? And all the chatter was initially around, being able just to continue to work. And I think we, quickly proved, at least at our company and talking to other people in my network, a lot of people were able to continue, at or near 100%, which is a wonderful thing. But now we're sort of shifting our focus to, what have we opened ourselves up to in terms of threats and technology, things like that. And, you got people, like Joe said, they're on their own home Wi-Fi network. Well, how many people have changed their passwords since they set up their router initially? Are they strong passwords? I think there's more points of entry into our company's systems than there ever were before, because we have people spidered throughout, the country. In our case, we have people all throughout the United States working remotely. And so I think that just increases the opportunity for something to go wrong. And then also, I've just noticed personally, just a lot of phishing, going on, getting these emails, hey, can you send this ACH? And I think we're just more susceptible to it, because before, if we were in the office, I'd just be walking into Joe and Joe, can we talk about this? But now I get more emails, and people's guard is probably a little bit down because they're just used to getting more emails and more requests like that, whereas maybe they didn't before. So I think there definitely is sort of this increased risk that comes with this ability to work remotely.
All right, Nasir, how are you seeing the remote work impacting?
I mean, I have to agree with both of my colleagues, but what I will add that is the level of risk depends on how your infrastructure, your network, and processes are deployed. I can see higher risk if your data is not segregated. If your sensitive data and everyday data is in the same network, I mean, you have a higher risk. If you do not have a device strategy and everybody is using their own personal device, or half of your company using a personal device to access your sensitive data, you are at higher risk. If you don't have a patch management to making sure that is all your devices all your servers, everything are patched appropriately on time, you are at high risk. Collaboration tools, which we all using, can pose a greater risk if you are not patching them, if you're not separating with your proper network segmentation. So it depends how all these different tools and processes are deployed in a particular company. We used to print sensitive PHI information in the office, and we have a very robust system to make sure that that information doesn't go out. We shred it before in a certain period of time. We allow our staff to print at home, but not PHI. So what controls you have, how you deploy your technology, it really determines the level of risk you are exposed to.
Excellent. Thank you. And I know you guys all started touching on some of the risks that are out there, and it seems that hackers and cyber terrorists are getting smarter, and they're coming up with new threats every day. But if you could narrow down what you feel are kind of the greatest risks that keep you up at night and concern you with your organization the most right now, what would you narrow it down to if you had to have only maybe one or two? Kent, how about you?
Yeah, so there's lots of things, but in terms of cyber, I think for what I've just seen personally is this increased phishing, right? It just seems like every day I'm getting more of these emails. Click here to finish your your annual corporate review, because they're all smart, right? They know that we're sort of finishing up, or companies are typically finishing up their annual performance review, so they target things like that. They spoof to be, they pretend to be the CEO and sending me an email saying, hey, when can we get this ACH out? Click here, all these click here things. And all it takes is one person in the organization to click on it, and then you're compromised. We had an incident recently where, we didn't click here, but one of our outside companies that we work with a lot, someone clicked on an email, and then all of a sudden we were getting emails from this person's address that looked real, and we're like, what is this? And so we had to send out reminders and be careful when you click on things, and work with IT to was it, we didn't know at first, did we get compromised or did they get compromised? And so our IT department then needs to work with someone else's to kind of figure it out and plug the holes, and sort of a reminder of like why we do some of the things that we do. So, and we're a small company, and we're very focused on cash, and someone just lets their guard down and sort of clicks on the wrong link, then our bank accounts or something else could be compromised pretty quickly, and that would hurt us pretty hard. So that's why we take a very sort of guarded, and we're always reminding people, adjusting our filters, things like that, to ensure that we can reduce the risk as much as possible.
Excellent. Nasir, what would you say if you had to narrow it down to one or two major risks? What are the most concerning to you, and why?
Yeah, I think I would say, and I always say that is your security is as good as your weakest link. You can build the world's most comprehensive security, spend millions of billions, but your weakest link are your third party and your vendors. And unfortunately, most companies, even the sophisticated companies in security, because of the nature of business, third parties are not managed well. And I'll give you an example of which almost everybody probably know about, the SolarWinds. So they had a huge breach which impacted almost 18,000 companies. And if you are one of them who are using SolarWinds and you don't have proper control at your network level, there's a good chance they have breached you. So it doesn't matter what kind of a security you have in place, the third-party management and the vendor management is always. And my business partner, who are great partners, will go and do that contracts We'll bring them on board and will tell me in the last minute, we need to integrate them. We need to give them the access, or business will fail, or sky will fall. And in many cases, we have to do it. And those are type of the risk is really keeping me worried, keeping me up at night, literally. So that's the biggest risk in my environment I see when it comes to security.
Excellent, thank you. And Joe, what do you think kind of is one of the major ones facing us right now?
Sure. Well, I definitely want to highlight third-party risk management as well, just on what we've already said. You know, when I worked at a large bank, we literally had 40,000 vendors in total. And of those, I think it was about 18,000 met our criteria for a security concern. And the criteria was really simple. They gave us software, they had a network connection to the bank, or we were giving them data to do our work. And if you think about that, how simple that is, and you think about how large of a scale that is, it's just astronomical. And how do you work with these vendors to make sure that they're secure is a big concern. Now, for a smaller company, so I'm going to pivot, for a smaller company, and even medium-sized company, and even large companies, the one that we haven't touched on is ransomware. As Kent has said, we're all working remotely. We're all getting more phishing emails. All these people all over the world have teams, call centers, groups of people whose job it is to try and get you to click on one link. The old adage is the crook only has to be right once. Information security and end users, because remember, information security is everybody's responsibility, including everybody who uses a computer. Those guys, we have to be right 100% of the time. They only have to be right 1 in a million to be profitable. And so ransomware and kind of the ACH scams that we're seeing, those are huge concerns. And the way that we need to address them is really something that nobody wants to hear on this call, but it's greater participation in the information security process and a little bit more training for the end user as well, and continual training for the end user and awareness. And the security professionals, by the way. So don't think that the training is one-sided. To maintain my certifications, I have to have 60 hours of training a year, plus 500 hours of field work just to maintain certification in the information security arena, right? So training and being aware of ransomware and end user computing issues and third-party risk are the three that I think are the ones that we should be talking about here on the call today.
Excellent, thank you. And not to guide the audience at all, but we are going to actually have a poll pop up now. So we'd like to hear from you in terms of what you feel the greatest risks are. So a couple of the ones we've discussed already, there's some other ones in here as well. So we'll give you guys a minute or two to read through them and think about which ones are most impactful for your organization.
You need to give like play-by-play or something.
I know. I wish I had the little like graph of it moving as people weighed in with their answers, you know.
Talk to your IT team.
Right, there we go. All right, excellent. So it looks like phishing comes in number 1 with ransomware following behind that, and third-party risk is number 3. And nobody liked any of my other options. So it looks like you guys were right on track on the fact that you guys are thinking the same thing as what the audience is concerned about too. So that's excellent. Moving on to that then. So since phishing was the number 1 threat that our audience is concerned about, let's start there. What recommendations do you guys have in terms of trying to mitigate that risk? How do you best, you know, Joe, I think you started talking about it already, so I'll throw it to you first, but you mentioned kind of training is one of the big ways to do it, but let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so training has several components, right? I think it's training, testing, but it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's people, process, and technology, right? If we don't if we don't have an end-to-end process, then it's going to break down, right? So we need better spam filters to filter these out to start. So let's decrease the amount of opportunity and decrease our attack surface from all these people that are sending us these phishing emails. So there's the technology component. There's a process component and a people component. Let's touch on the people component first. Again, I touched on it, it's training. Training can be as simple as a $15 class from an organization that produces the training professionally. There are a number of really good ones out there, and then there are companies that also specialize in training. And the third component that nobody's going to want to hear about, and that's testing. And that gets to our process component. So if we just give you some generic training, there's about a 20% uptick generally in awareness. If we combine that with some testing, where we send you some phishing emails, and we can monitor to see if you've opened it, to see how long it's been open, whether or not you clicked on any of the links in the phishing emails, and then pair that with additional training and awareness. And that's how we really get to a better place in terms of getting people to understand the risk, mitigate the risk, build awareness around the risk, and help them really, really move this forward. But remember, it's all three, right? So I don't want to focus on just one, but we have to increase our technology capabilities. We have to keep our education capabilities up, and our training and our process capabilities as well. And there's other components too. We need to make sure that when you get that ACH email, that there are controls in place that validate that ACH. So if it's just, even if you're a small company, if it's just Tracy, you sending me an email, and then I click a link and it says, okay, please send this money, and I send this money without having a maker checker function where I make the ACH and somebody else has to check it and validate it, and we build processes. So look, we know that ACH and wire transfer fraud is becoming really significant. So let's look at our processes in our organizations that help reduce that put 2 or 3 people in the path intentionally, because 2 heads are better than 1. All right, I don't want to monopolize the discussion for too long, so let's get some other panelists' thoughts on this. But I'm very passionate.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on your testing, and people shouldn't be afraid of testing, because for us it was relatively easy. We outsource our IT because we're a small holding company, and the subsidiaries that we have, they have their own IT agreements. But just from talking to our IT vendor, they're like, oh yeah, we include testing as part of your annual fees. We're like, what? Oh, we didn't even know that. And so we worked with them. It took a half an hour. They presented a couple of, here's the emails that we would send to your team to see what they're doing. And it was exactly like Joe said. And our team didn't know we were doing this, but we had a period of 2 or 3 weeks where 3 or 4 different versions of this email would come out to the team, and then we got a report back at the end saying, how did we do? And fortunately for us, we did pretty well. I think we only had 1 person who actually opened it. No one clicked on the link, which was a wonderful thing. So even for small companies, I think it's relatively straightforward to work with if you have a CIO in-house, work with them. If you've got an outsourced IT vendor, then they should be able to do this for you relatively easily. And I think that's huge to see, because you can remind people as many times as you want, but if they don't listen or they're just not paying attention, then how do you know? So I think it's a good way to see if people are getting the message. And fortunately for us, they were getting the message, and so that's a huge thing for us. And then I think Joe, I don't know if you're a finance guy in your previous life, but having those internal controls in place over your banking relationships, right? So for us, the same person can't set up and release an ACH, right? One person has to set it up, the other person has to release it. So hopefully by having those internal controls in place that the finance folks all know and love and hate, right? Love-hate relationship, internal controls, Having those in place as well and making sure you test those as part of your annual plan, I think is an important step to trying to mitigate that risk.
Good. Excellent. Nasir, anything new that you want to add on that topic?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to add what just Joe and Kent said, but let me bring a fourth dimension, that is communication. Communication is not a core competency of IT or InfoSec, but in this case, it needs to be. This communication is a little bit different. This is a human psychology. Unless you connect the cause and impact for them, doesn't matter what training you provide, you're just not going to pay attention. So the companies need to figure that out, is how to connect the impact to company mission and company credibility. If we have a breach in our company, we can recover technically and business processes wise, but we can never recover, and I'm using never, our credibility with our customer. When you give this message to employees who are very mission oriented, we notice that their attitudes towards phishing, towards password change, all those things is pretty much changed. Also, even the senior leadership, even the CFO, many senior leadership do not understand the cost of the breach. So maybe it's a technique for you to share the cost of the, recently we have Gallagher, which is an insurance company. They impact us, so we are in touch with them. They have spent so far over $100 million. How many companies can afford that? Right? So you need to connect these impacts to company credibility as well as sustainability. Can you sustain after that breach? You're saving $1 million now, but do you have 50 million to recover from it? So the communication piece, what I'm finding it is the difficult one, and is the missing piece in most strategies. So that's what I will add to Kent and Joe.
Excellent, excellent. And I know ransomware in particular is very disruptive. So not just the cost of it, but I know some companies that have been hit by it and they're actually locked entirely out of their systems for weeks on end, which is a huge disruption to business. So what would your guys' advice be with something like ransomware if it did attack? What do you do then? What's the next step after it happens? Anybody want to take that one first? I know.
Well, I think maybe I'll just jump in. So, the first thing is, contact IT, right? So you need to get IT involved right away to see what exactly happened, what's been compromised, what can you do. You got to get legal involved, right? Because someone's attacked you. So get your legal team, be it your in-house counsel or if you outsource it, whomever, your trusted legal advisor involved right away too, because they need to be made aware of the situation and they could provide some guidance on what you can do from that perspective, if anything. But the way to and Nasir and Joe can answer this better than I can, and I think we talked about this a little bit the other day, is you need to have backups, right? And you need to be able to not only have backups, but you need to be able to restore those backups, right? So if you just back up and you don't know how to restore it, or if you've never gone through that process, then it's probably going to be difficult and probably going to take you a lot more time to get it back up and running. But if you've got the backups that are run on a regular cycle, be it daily or twice a day or whatever is appropriate for your business, depending on the data volume and things like that, that's going to go a long way to getting you back up and running sooner rather than later. So from my perspective, from the CFO's chair, It's, get IT involved right away, make sure, you've got backups long before you need them, and, work with your legal team. And then if you're an SEC company like we are, then we have to evaluate exactly what happened, because, the SEC came out with new rules with respect to reporting when, one of the big company, I think one of the big credit card companies was compromised a year and a half ago. So you need to evaluate it from that perspective as well, to see if you have to have a disclosure too. So if you're an SEC company, there's an added layer of review there that you need to do as well.
Thank you. Nasir, Joe, anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, so
sure, Nasir.
Go ahead, Jeff.
No. This was a topic that you were very passionate about when we spoke earlier, and so I want to certainly let you take lead here.
Yeah, one assumption I always make, unfortunate, but I make, is there is a possibility in nowadays that you will be breached through ransomware. You may be locked out. So the best thing you can do is to prepare yourself and have your business continuity plan in place. Business continuity plan is a lot more than restoring your data, because those people who are breached, they will tell you that even their archive are breached. Now what you're going to do? So if your archive data is breached, where are you going to store now from, right? So communication is a huge piece of business continuity plan. When something like that happens, everyone needs to know what they need to do. If you will try to figure that out at that time, you're going to be in a big, big trouble. You need to have contracts in place with the forensic and validation companies. Otherwise, you're going to spend weeks to find them and weeks to put the contract in place. In our case, when something like that will happen, our stakeholder, our customer will not permit us to do the forensic and the validation, because they lost that trust on us. So they require us to engage a third party who validate that, yes, environment is clean, now we can go back to the business. Right? So all these pieces need to be in place. And the last thing I will mention is they need to be dry run. Because putting things on paper is very different when you execute them. You can't find the phone numbers, people are not available, the computers are down, your plan will be all gone. So dry run, what they call it in our technical term, is the tabletop exercises at least once a year will give you the assurance if something like that will happen, how long it will take. Because I have an SLA with my customers that I will be back in business in 1 week. So if I don't do that exercise, there's no way I can give my CEO the confidence that I will be back in business in 1 week. So I will ask the business and a CFO to sit down with IT and say, IT, tell me what's your plan is. So I'll stop here, because I have a lot to share on that topic, but let me, Joe, add more in it.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. So while the first two panelists were giving us some really good information, I couldn't help but want to do a Google search. And the search was simply, what percentage of companies have disaster recovery plans? And there are 5 statistics that pop up instantly from different groups. 51% of organizations have no business continuity plans. 75% of small businesses have no disaster or business continuity plans in place. And guys, this isn't outing anybody, but I would just simply ask yourself this question. When was the last time someone in your organization involved you in any sort of disaster recovery, business continuity, testing, risk awareness, or any sort of discussion around this? And if your answer is, I don't know, then your company probably has an issue that you need to deal with. It's really that simple. Because if you think they're doing it without you, A, they're probably not. Information security and information technology are really, really busy folks just like you. And you have to help set that priority with them. And you need to be involved. How can they make sure that you can recover if they haven't talked to you? How do you know that your computer would work? How do they know that they connect your computer? How do they know that your third parties would be accessible if they haven't talked to you? So I don't want to harp on that, but I want you to take that away. And we'll talk more about this, I think, later, but what's the role of the business in information technology and information security? But you do have a role, and it's a critically important role. IT, in my view, in many respects, is a service organization or a service entity to the business. And who controls the service provider? If someone comes to work on your house, you just say, gee, I hope you do a good job and I'm going to let you go and do whatever you want in my house? No. You have a contract in place, you look at the work, and you make sure that the work is appropriate to meet your needs. And the same is true in any organization. And if you think otherwise, then I wanna try and dissuade you of that, because we can only change if we're all committed to it. All right, so we'll talk more about, I think, the role of business and information technology and information security a little bit more. But I just wanted to touch on those points, that every company needs to have a plan. They need to sit and talk about that plan. They need to test that plan, and they need to make sure that plan is effective for them. As we've already said, you can never recover your importance of your business to your customer, and your customer will never view you the same if they have a problem with you. So let's try and avoid that problem before it happens. All right, so sorry, a little sober there maybe, but a very important message.
Absolutely.
Tracy, one more point, and it is just a little bit elaboration what Kent said earlier. If you look at the statistic, if somebody Google the statistic, what you will find that is majority of companies are not able to restore from their archive because the archive process is so cumbersome. And then over the period of time, the technology you used and you're keeping that data there, it's become obsolete. And because you're not testing, your connection, your integration is going to fail to migrate from there back there. So whether you outsource or you insource, the testing of that restoring process need to be at least annual. Having a plan really not that important, but making sure the plan works is important.
So I have a question for my panelists. So I agree with everything that you guys have been saying. But I'm not sure the audience makeup today, but I'm guessing it's large companies to small companies. And so, what would you say to the smaller companies that, in normal times, they're watching every penny that they spend, and with COVID, it's even tighter. And I just hear you guys talking about this stuff and that I agree with. And I'm sort of adding up the dollars in my head, right? I'm like, gosh, it's going to cost me $1 million to do this, and I don't have $1 million. And so what would be your advice to people who may be thinking that and going like, I want to do all this stuff, but I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have the budget. And I know, yeah, but if I don't do this, then the cost to my business is going to be exponential. But unfortunately, we can't always make decisions like that. So, what would be sort of your advice to someone who may be thinking, I want to do all this stuff, but it's going to just cost me too much, more than I can afford right now?
So I'll take that one. And, I worked in a large bank where we did have millions of dollars, and there were hundreds of IT professionals and information security professionals. But since I retired a year ago, I've worked with all sizes of different companies. And my response is really quite simple, that it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be hours and billions of hours and billions of dollars. All of your information security and your IT controls and people, process, and technology should be scaled to your company. So we did a small company assessment of a single computer system because they said, this is one system that I can't live without. And, I probably spent 30 hours consulting with them. We did a tabletop exercise to look at the risks. Then we started looking at their controls, and they said, well, we don't have written policies. We're too small. And I said, you know what? I tell you what, as part of this assessment, I will write you less than 1 page of how you're going to manage your disaster recovery. And I will hold myself to 1 page. But then every year we're going to look at this 1 page and we're going to talk about it. And then we're going to do that test. So literally, I think that this can be achieved on, I don't want to say a shoestring budget, but on a very reasonable, appropriate, scaled budget. And I don't think that any company has to go without disaster recovery because they think it's going to be too expensive. Just make it reasonable for you. And I think it's very achievable. And I've done a couple of consulting arrangements recently to achieve just that. I worked with an institution, a cultural institution here in Chicago. I worked with a small business. And every time we scale it to their needs. And so that's how I would answer that is you can afford this. It doesn't have to be super expensive, and it can be done reasonably for your needs, for sure.
Ken, one more suggestion for you and the people in your situation, and I am more or less in the same situation too, is in addition to what Joe said, is if you have outsourced your IT, just make sure that your contract has proper SLAs. And I tell you that I see all the time, people don't. So if you don't have the SLA, service level agreement with respect to everything, including DR, then you can't hold them accountable. And that should be part of the cost you already negotiated, not anything additional. So that will be something I would suggest to you and people in your situation should look at your contract before disaster occurs.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can talk a little bit more about third-party risk because we said that that's one of our big risks. And you need to have, again, it can be as simple as 1 page, but a checklist of all the important topics to cover with your vendors, and business continuity, information security, SLAs are something that we don't always think about, but are absolutely critical to ensure that your third parties deliver you the service that you need. And it's, as always, it's the exact wrong time to say, hey, do we have business continuity planning when we get a ransomware attack? Then it's probably too late. And if you haven't tested it, and again, just a reminder that if you haven't talked information security or if you haven't done a test, then you need to reach out to your IT and information security folks and ask them, hey, what are we doing about this, right? So I'll try not to harp on that too much, but that's really important, is to remain engaged on this topic. I absolutely agree.
Excellent. And it actually feeds into one of the questions here from the audience. It came in, it said, if the company's ERP system is cloud-based, how do we hold them accountable for having effective backup and disaster recovery plans? Does anyone want to take that question?
Tracy, can you repeat the question? I think I got partially, but not fully.
Yeah, it said if the company's ERP system is cloud-based, how do we hold them accountable for having effective backup and disaster recovery plans?
I mean, my experience is most of the cloud solution, they have the redundancy, but what I would say that is a very simple answer, but Joe and I said before, I mean, that's your responsibility before you contract with them to go through with that checklist and make sure you're asking those questions and have that as a part of your contract. Like, for example, I cannot have a redundancy offshore. It has to be in US. And most of the cloud-based companies, I mean, because of the cost, they do offshore. So if I don't check with them, if I don't ask them, like when you do the Zoom, your Zoom call maybe originate from China, maybe originate from Ukraine. But my call, when I call Zoom, no, it doesn't, because I have a specific contract with the Zoom. So those kind of things, your responsibility to make sure that you ask and you have in your contract, your vendor won't tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, and they all should be able to provide you an annual report. I'm dating myself. they used to be called like the SAS 70 reports. They're called something else now. But, if you're a publicly traded company and you're outsourcing a key part of your controls, and you're required to still test those. And a lot of the big, even the mid-size ERP, if you look at Sage or Oracle or SAP or Microsoft or whomever it is, they should be able to provide you their annual report where they did and they went through and they audited not only their financial controls, but their IT controls that relate to that data. So they should be able to provide you an annual report that you review and see if it's adequate for your purposes. And most of the brand name ones should be able to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and but I build on both what we've said already, is that you need to sit down and say, well, what's important to me with this third-party vendor? Does my data have to be in the US? Are there other controls that I need to have in place? Do we want to test backups? How do we want to handle just minor configuration changes? Do we want to require a VPN connection to the vendor to eliminate risk? There are so many little configuration and little details that need to be looked at. And the only way to address those is to sit down while you're doing your contracts on an annual basis and just say, hey, what are we missing? Because oftentimes, if you just spend 20 minutes in a tabletop exercise and then ask 4 questions of your vendor, you may increase your security by simply just asking a question. They're like, oh yeah, sure, if you want us to do that, we can absolutely click the VPN only, and you've just eliminated a significant risk. And so or we want multi-factor authentication, or we want that wire to have that dual control. Guys, it's the simple stuff that can reduce the risk. I've seen reports that say 90% of security breaches can be handled with typical and normal simple controls. And so I'm going to do one quick plug, and I'll only do it once, that IFG can help you if you ever want to do a security assessment, or if you ever want to look at a vendor. You can reach out to them and they'll be happy to do that. That's my only plug for the day, I promise. But I couldn't resist one because this is what I'm passionate about, and I'd love to help any organization that needs that help.
Thanks, Joe. And I didn't even pay him to say that, so appreciate the plug, though. But moving on, Kent, you brought up a great point when you were asking about cost and how there's sometimes competing priorities or conflicts between the finance function and the IT or information security function beyond cost. It could be, timing, it could be priorities, like you said, you're short on resources, or you just feel that there's different threats or risks out there than what, for the finance team versus what the information security team is identifying. How do you address that, and how do you guys work together as a team to make sure that things are being prioritized properly?
Yeah, great question. It goes back to communication, making sure that you're meeting with your head of IT, be it insource or outsource, on a regular basis, that you're setting, priorities, near term, mid, longer term, where do you want to go? And then reviewing the basics. How are we doing on some of the things that we mentioned today? Are we backing up? How's that going? I seem to get a lot more phishing lately. What are we doing with those controls? And it's like any other prioritization process, right? It's just sort of meeting with that and sort of going through it and agreeing on what should we be focused on. And I don't know what I don't know with IT. I'm tech savvy, but I'm not an infrastructure person. And so it's that back and forth of discussion, and it's almost like sales, right? So I always said, if you let sales run the company, you wouldn't have any cash. If you let the finance people run the company, you wouldn't have any sales, right? So it's that sort of natural, I wouldn't call it tension, but sort of discussion and give and take that would sort of lead you to figure out that right middle ground where you need to be going with IT. And, like I said, I've only been with our company for about a year. First time I've ever been at a company where IT's been outsourced. So it's a bit new for me. And so, we meet with, I meet with our head of IT. We have a dedicated person over at our outsourced vendor, and we meet on a regular basis. And, we talk through a lot of this stuff. We want to do a Microsoft upgrade. We talked through that. What is that going to take? Last year we went through a server conversion as well. So it's just, it's probably sounds pretty basic, but just developing that rapport with your IT department and, making sure that they know, like, you need to tell me like what threats you're hearing about, because they should be connected to what's going on in the IT world and not just the headlines, right? I see the headlines when it makes the newspaper, the SolarWinds stuff, the other things, but they should be, advising you on the other things that don't make the headlines. They should be connected to their industry groups and, being able to tell you what we should be doing, and you should set that expectation with them, and then you kind of talk through everything and you find like what's right for your company to focus on going forward. There's really no sort of magic solution. It's just developing that rapport and open line of communication, setting expectations with your IT folks.
Excellent, thank you. Joe, Nasir, anything from the other side in terms of the best way to work together?
Absolutely. As you probably figured that out from my conversation, I'm very high on organization and planning and process in advance. Believe it or not, that the approach I have adopted, it does not create any conflict with the business or my finance organization. So my role as an IT InfoSec is to identify the risk. My business owns the risk. I don't own the risk. I mean, as a company, we own the risk, but the business owns the risk. They make the decision how far they can take the risk. And at that point, three of us have a discussion. The business, CFO, and IT. As long as business accept the risk and say, I'm taking the risk, I acknowledge it, I understanding it, don't do anything about it, I don't push it for it. But in general, they are very smart people. They care about the risk and the credibility. And they say, yes, this is some area we need to invest. Let's try to find some options. Let's try to find some other cheaper solution. But that conversation, we need to be in these three entities with the understanding that I never push my business that I own the risk. No, they own the risk. And I think that's my approach, and it's been working, Tracy and the team, I mean, pretty reasonably well.
Yeah, I'll chime in, and I can't agree more with the risk. So once the risk is identified, it needs to be quantified with a probability of occurrence and impact, right? And the business needs to make sure they understand that. And it's IT's role to explain the risk. If it's a server-based risk, if it's a technical risk, I always tell all my staff, if you can't explain the risk to me, and I understand most of these IT risks, you're certainly not going to get the business to understand it. So we've got to be able to communicate in ways that the business can understand. And ultimately, business owns that risk, but we have to have that engagement and partnership at all levels. And, when we talk about like time and expense, if you have a quarterly meeting with your IT team, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours a year, that's not a ton of time. It's basics, blocking and tackling, and this isn't rocket scientists. We just need to kind of make sure we're doing it. And that's why I really advocate for an annual IT audit or a risk assessment and a tabletop exercise, just annually. Doesn't have to be a ton of time, but let's just make sure we're looking at it and that we're engaged and that we're all thinking about it. And as long as we're doing that, we'll eliminate 80 to 90% of those risks. I guarantee it.
Excellent. And I think that actually leads into our next question for the audience here, not to draw lines or anything, but whose responsibility is it within the organization? So Tessa, if you want to pop up that polling question. So who owns the responsibility for the organization's financial data security? Is it IT, finance, the audit and risk function, or all of the above?
Well, how are people going to vote for this one?
I know.
Well, let's see how much. So it would be interesting if we could have had two questions. How would you have voted before we started this discussion, and how are you voting now?
Right, exactly. Don't let what's been discussed already sway your decision. Let's go with the original thoughts.
Probably too late, but it'll be interesting to see.
Just a few more people left.
All right. I see we've got another chat as well. What's going on in the chat?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep. Makes perfect sense.
All right. So I think that there was a little bit of being swayed by the discussion, but 82% of individuals on the call are very, in agreement that it's all the above functions are responsible. So next to that, it's finance is the next option, followed by IT. So a very interesting turn of events there. So moving on from what we've discussed with that, then, what roles do you guys feel each line of business should play in security? So you guys started talking about, identifying risk and, the risk appetite. So talk a little bit more towards, what roles do they play in this?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I think we have touched on a lot of them. So yep. First off, let's start at the high level, right? We talked about having an annual risk assessment, just a tabletop exercise, a group of people in a room, hopefully a facilitator that really understands risk, IT, and information security. And we just go through a risk identification process and we have a risk discussion. And then we look at our controls and we say, well, what sort of controls do we have in place? And what, if any, controls do we want to implement, change, modify, add, subtract? And then how do we want to test them? And I think if you're doing that on an annual basis, and again, it can be really simple that if you just do a walkthrough of your risks, your controls, your control testings, and then talk about whatever modifications we want to do. If you're doing that, you're probably ahead of 90% of the small businesses in the United States. And it can be that simple.
Good. Anybody else want to add any more to that topic, or can we leave that one behind now?
Yeah, so Tracy, what I will add there is when you ask that question, okay, who owns the responsibility? The general answer is everybody. Mm-hmm. The problem with this answer is when everybody owns, then it means nobody owns.
Sure.
So it's a very serious matter. So criticality is the roles needs to be defined to the last detail. Okay, what is IT responsibility when it comes to security? What business roles and responsibilities? In my company, my CEO, because when there's a big breaches occur, who will go the first? Usually the CEO. First CEO will try to fire the CISO, but then usually board will later fire the CEO. So my suggestion is make sure that is the roles and responsibilities are clearly defined, documented, because they will play a role in business continuity. Who's supposed to call when disaster occurs to the board member? Who's supposed to call legal? Who's supposed to call this person? If you don't have those things detailed out in document, then nobody will own anything.
Yeah. That's an excellent point, because you're right. It's really easy to say that everybody owns it until something goes wrong, and then nobody wants to own it. So you're right. It's good to set those expectations in advance. Tracy,
10:30. I have another meeting. Can we wrap this thing up, please? Is it 10:30, right?
Oh, no, it's 9:30.
Oh, 9:30.
Yeah,
okay.
But the Eastern is 10:30, right?
Eastern is, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Do you have to hop off at 9?
No, continue. I think I mixed up the zone. Go ahead.
Okay, no worries. Excellent. So just kind of moving forward, one of the things that we started talking about, Kent, you're on outsourced. And I know a lot of companies have insourced. So maybe we can take a little bit of time here to talk through kind of the difference of outsourced versus insourced for your security issues. So Kent, you've been on both, so do you want to take that one first?
Sure. Yeah. So, we're just a small holding company, probably like 15 people. So having a dedicated CIO and in-house, probably from a cost perspective, may not make sense for us right now. But we have a good partner, a contract that's been in place for a few years, and I actually think at one point we did have it in-house when we were a much larger company. We've been pivoting our strategy, and so they know us, right? So I think it's good if you're going to go outsource that you find a good vendor, someone who knows you, who gets you. Spend a lot of time doing the vetting process. I inherited this relationship, so I didn't go through that. But if I were to do that, then that's one just needs to make sure that they're comfortable, get referrals, things like that. You get with outsource, you get the benefit of them seeing different companies, and they have to stay up with best practices, or else they're not going to have any business, right? So you're getting a team of experts who are up to speed, seeing what other clients are doing, can share best practices, more resources than maybe you would have available to you if you just went solely in-house. The inverse to that is if you go in-house, then you've got a dedicated person or team that lives and breathes your business 24/7. So we'll have that deep knowledge of your business and your systems, and you kind of set the agenda. You're not sort of subject to other clients' demands that may have. So you got to weigh each of those and figure out which is the best model for you. And like us, maybe you evolve, right? So we used to be a large, big bad insurance company, and we sold off I'm not saying anything that's not public knowledge. We sold off our last big chunk in 2018, and so we kind of pivoted our strategy then. But we want to grow back into a larger company, and we may grow back into an in-source model eventually. So it's not I'm going to do this forever. It's like what's right for us, what's right for the company for the next X number of years. And just know when you make that decision, there's ticks in every column, right? There's benefits to in-source, there's benefits to outsource, and there's downsides as well, right? Too. So it's whatever is you think is appropriate, but you got to have that function, right? You can't just think anymore. Maybe 20 years ago it was different. With technology, maybe the CFO could do, or whoever could take on different functions, including IT. But now with the demands not only on the CFO function, but also technology is incredibly more complicated than it was. You need that person or that team who knows it and can help you out.
Excellent. Nasir, do you want to take that next, or Joe? Joe, you can hop in.
Sure. I think, inherently, every company has some component of outsource, right? We're all using either an HR vendor, a customer base monitor, tax or accounting software outsourced. So every company has some degree of outsourcing. And we've talked about third-party risk, and that's where this really comes in. And when you talk about in-source or outsource, I think almost every company by default is a hybrid. No company can live without some sort of outsourced service provider. And then it's a matter of what are you insourcing and outsourcing? And Kent talked a lot about and really touched on the point that if you're using an outsourced service provider, that they can bring to the table a wider array of team. And even if you want to remain a hybrid, where you have, let's say that you want to do your own internal servers, but you want to outsource some of your significant applications, I still would really advocate for working with one of your outsourced providers to look internally and externally at what you're doing. And so I think that's really the key, is to say, well, why are we having this strategy? How is it working for us? And how can we improve it? And then what can we do to make it better? And to look at it. And I really do like the idea of outsourcing some of this, because now if you outsource to Gmail by default, rather than, let's say, running your own internal infrastructure for email, by default, Gmail can bring you a raft of information security controls, encryption end to end, and they can bring you multi-factor authentication, and they can protect against man-in-the-middle attacks, and they can do a whole bunch of stuff And that's not to say that there aren't trade-offs, as Kent spoke about. But I think if I were a small business, and I've worked with a couple of them now, that we're starting to lean more towards an outsourced model, but with a company that's going to be responsive to your needs. And I think that's really key, is to develop that relationship. And Ken spoke about that relationship. But I think if I were a small company, I probably wouldn't insource very much at this point. I would be looking to outsource more of it. But that's kind of my perspective, because the companies can just bring you more to the table at a more economical price point. So it's faster, better, cheaper. And I think we're moving in that direction for small business.
Tracy, let me add a few perspective based on my experience. The major difference between internal IT and external IT or outsourcing is the flexibility. You have a more flexibility with your internal IT. You can blame everything on your internal IT. You can ask them to make the changes on dime. You can make them work 24/7 if there's a need to be. You don't have that flexibility with your outsource, because every time you want a change, you need to show them the dollars, because that's what part of a contract. So I use a cliche all the time, is your vendor is as good as you are. If you are not good, your vendor will not be good. This is as simple as it is. Every strategy will work, depend how you executed it. So my suggestion is for those who, are outsourcing or want to outsource, is to make sure that is a proper contract in place and somebody who's knowledgeable. That's another critical aspect, is I have seen a lot of outsourced contract where nobody from InfoSec or IT was involved. Very smart people were involved, but not the people who understand who are in the weeds, who understand what to anticipate. And you don't need to hire them. You can have somebody, another third party, to make sure that your interest is protected. But then care and feeding is important. So it's not enough that you have a good contract, but is your vendor executing the contract based on the SLAs and your clauses? So these are the things, if you can consider in advance, I think you can avoid a lot of issues in future.
Excellent.
And what I'm sharing with you is after a lot of learning of my own failures dealing with these vendors. So don't think that I have all this solution. No, we have made so many mistakes. I have made so many mistakes in my career managing these vendors.
I just want to build on that for a quick second, is that I absolutely agree that even if you're outsourced, and we talked about it with business continuity, that somebody has to own it and somebody has to be responsible for it. And they have to have the knowledge to do it. So it's not something that any of us can't learn, but you have to dedicate yourself to that and to manage it and to manage that expectations actively. So if a company wants to outsource their entire IT stack, that doesn't mean that the risk is outsourced. Who owns the risk? We talked about it earlier. Ultimately, if there's a failure at a business level and the reputation of the business is impacted, the IT outsourcer you can fire the IT outsourcer, but you can't recover your reputation, right? It takes a minute to build a great relationship. It takes literally a second to lose it, and it takes forever to recover it, is the axiom that I've always heard. And that's absolutely true. So if you are going to outsource, that doesn't mean that you have to actively manage it. And so I don't want to plant that seed that let's just outsource everything. It still needs to be really well managed. And Kent hit on that, and so did Nasir, and it's super important.
Excellent. And then in terms of training and certifications, Joe, I know you mentioned much earlier in the discussion here some of the continuing education and certifications that you had. What would you guys recommend you should have for your organization in terms of IT or information security certifications, or if you're looking at an outsource as well, what would you look for your vendor to have?
So we're talking about third-party risk when you're hiring your vendor. And again, I would advise anybody to have that checklist that we've talked about a number of times, and to have somebody who really has a deep understanding of outsourcing or contracting, and to engage the right team, right? So if we're going to outsource any system, the line of business needs to be involved, finance needs to be involved, IT needs to be involved. If you have a dedicated information security team, they need to be involved. Your legal team needs to be involved to make sure that the contract provisions are appropriate. And just think about it as a team approach. So if we're going to outsource, let's start with a team approach, and let's have a good checklist, and let's have a good risk identification. It's an opportunity to do risk identification and mitigation, and to make sure that all the provisions that we need are in the contract. So if we start, that's more of an outsourcing discussion, right? So that's third-party risk management and outsourcing. And that's a critical component because you're never going to get the service. You're only going to get agreement from your service provider when you sign the contract. It's very difficult to amend a contract later. So that's the beginning. But if we're talking about, do we want to focus now a little bit more, let me stop there. Do we want to focus a little bit more on third-party risk, or do we want to talk about or employee awareness and employee training? What was the intent there? Or do we want to just, now that we've started third-party, let's talk about third-party?
Yeah, I was going to say, in all honesty, Joe, I don't know how many more topics we can go really in depth with. I wanted to make sure that we were given some time here for the audience to ask some questions at the end. So maybe at this point we transition over to, I'll give each of you a couple minutes to just, if there's any key takeaways that you want people to be left with, or anything additional that we didn't have a chance to talk about that you think is key for anyone in the audience listening. So Nasir, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I want to quickly touch base on certification frameworks. So there are two situations. In one situation, you can do your own controls, but then there is a situation where you are in the industry which require you to go through a certain certification process. You don't have a choice. If you're in a banking industry, you have their standard, security standard. I think the PCI D something, I'm not familiar with that. If you're in a healthcare, you need to go through the high trust. There's another security framework like NIST, ISO. Although high trust now is offering, which include HIPAA, as well as if you are certified with high trust, you automatically certify with NIST as well as HIPAA, depend on the control. So high trust has about close to 800-900 control, depending on the size of the organization, depending on the data you have, depending on so many different things. They will assess how many control you need to certify against. So if you certify against certain controls, they can certify you. So what is best for you is depend on your industry. I think what the best thing it does, it will not secure you more. That's one thing I can tell you. But what it will do, because you are also a third party to people, right? When they come to you and they ask you the question about your security and you say, I am ISO 2700 certified, or I'm high trust 9.3 certified. I mean, that's the credibility you add. But at the same time, you will have a framework, so you don't need to learn your own framework. But it's expensive, it's not cheap. So that's really I wanted to add in case if people have a question regarding what they should do regarding the certification. I mean, it varies from industry to industry and company to company.
Great, thank you. All right, Joe, you want to go next for your closing, anything, takeaways or additional topic you want to cover?
Sure, I think the one topic we didn't cover was cyber insurance. And I think that's kind of an emerging topic. Larger companies are certainly jumping into that boat. And as more insurance companies are offering this, they're offering various levels of cyber insurance. And we don't have time to go into the in-depth importance of it, but I would think that's all part of your risk discussion. And cyber insurance can help you recover, but it won't help you recover your reputation. But it may help in getting your recovery achieved, and it may alleviate some of the expense associated with it. So what I would say is that a lot of the companies should look at cyber insurance to see if it's time for them to purchase cyber insurance. I think a lot of companies are not at this time, and I think that's probably okay. But I think it's time to at least look at that topic, and we could have a whole nother session on just cyber insurance and how it works and whether it's viable and important to an organization. But again, it gets back to your risk in the organization and the cost of recovering your systems. And if the impacts and the cost to your recovery of your systems, especially if you're in-house, then it may be time to look at cyber insurance. And so I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe.
Tracy, I wanted to add something because I think it's an extremely important topic. Is you having a cyber insurance, I mean, it makes perfect sense. You have to have, depending on your own assessment. But there's another important component, which I would say that is a lot of companies miss that out, is when I do a contract with a third party, I must have them have cyber insurance, otherwise I don't do the contract. And the cyber insurance the amount of cyber insurance depend on the risk they pose to me. So very recently, we have somebody doing some wireframe for us. They really don't have access to our critical data. So we asked them for a cyber insurance. They never have a cyber insurance for $2 million. And we said, we cannot do the contract with you until you have the cyber insurance. We have a Milliman, which is a huge actuarial company who does the risk assessment for us. They have access to our data. We have a $40 million cyber insurance with them because we won't recover their breach in $2 million. So this is an extremely important, not only you should have, but everybody who's doing business with you should have the cyber insurance.
Thank you. All right, Ken, any wrapping comments?
Yeah, so I would just say don't be afraid of IT and IT security. I would say maybe to relate it to some of the financial people, but it's like taxes, right? So I remember when I first started finance and accounting, I always sort of shied away from the tax side of things, but because it's just like this black box, it's kind of scary, all these tax codes. But as you sort of peel back the onion, you get more and more comfortable with it. I think the same was with IT. It's we talked about ways how, it can get very expensive very quickly, but Joe shared some things where no, you can focus on the blocking and tackling, and you don't have to blow your budget to do that. So embrace it. Don't be afraid by it. And I think the day will come where you'll be like, gosh, I'm so glad I did that because it helped prevent something or helped get you ahead of something. So I just encourage people to be curious about it, and ask those questions that Nasir and Joe were sort of mentioning, and what's my company doing and how can I help out with it? And no matter what level of the organization that you're in, if you're showing initiative and taking the lead on something like this, then people are going to be thankful for it. Maybe not initially, but eventually they will be. Just create the awareness. It's from small, large, medium company, we all need to be doing this, and it doesn't take $1 billion to do it. You can certainly spend that, but I think we've demonstrated that there's ways you can do it cost effectively to get you where your company needs to be. And I'll apologize because I got to go here in a couple of minutes to run my kids somewhere, but I do appreciate the opportunity to speak with the group today. And if there's some questions that come up and I'm not here to answer them, feel free to send them my way, and people can feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or otherwise. I'm happy to sort of network and share my knowledge because I've been there before too. And so I always, when I take on a new challenge, I look for someone who maybe knows some things, and I'm happy to share my insights as well.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all three of you joining us today and the time. And I I know Kent and Nasir, you guys both have to hop off pretty quickly here. So if anyone has any questions in the audience, we'll try and get those covered. And as Kent mentioned, if anyone needs to hop off before your question gets answered, we'll still get some answers for you and get back to you. So feel free to open that up now.
Come on, somebody has to have a question. Well, I see the chat box has something.
Yeah, I think that's.
Oh yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Sharing some LinkedIn connections for you guys there.
Did we get
Yeah,
Steve's question or Raj's question answered?
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Q&A portion. We had Steve Wolf ask a question and Raj ask a question.
I actually did not see Steve come through.
Cyber insurance. So Steve, hopefully that got your question answered. Raj asked, when your cloud service provider does not want to give you RTO and RPO is part of BCP, although there is redundancy build in how much reliance you can have on the vendor, even if the vendor is one of the strong, credible vendor. So it looks like he might have been just putting some good commentary there.
Okay. Yep, and I see Steve's question came through now. What are your thoughts on the value of cyber insurance? For a while, it was a rather nascent coverage, but has since come a long way. What is your experience in using this coverage? And I think we did start talking about that a little bit, and I know you guys had some additional comments that you said you could make about the insurance. So in terms of value of it, Joe, Nasir, any comments you want to make on that?
Yeah, I think I did mention a few things, but two additional things I will mention that is one is in today's world, I mean, there's a huge value. And the second, from the experience perspective, Steve, what I will tell you that is the premium of cyber insurance is gone. Like, I mean, I remember doing it first time and doing it the last year. We are paying literally over 150%. And in some cases, they even will not insure you. So my advice is work with your broker, fully understand what is covered, what is not covered, what your responsibility. It is not like any other insurance, but you need to have it. Your vendors needs to have it.
Yeah, and what I would add is it's understand your risk and understand the impact of it. So we talked a little bit about earlier about costs of breach and the impact. So if you're a company, let's say like Nasir, who has HIPAA information, or if you're, let's say, a tax accountancy group and you have thousands and thousands of people's personal information, you can start to add up the cost of a breach very quickly, both in terms of you may get sued, you may have to pay reparation, you may have to do recovery activities. And so if you don't understand what your financial exposure is, you may not even understand that you probably need cyber insurance. And so I think, again, it's that tabletop exercise where you sit down and say, what's the total cost of a potential problem in our organization? And what's that cost going to be if we actually suffer a breach? And if we want to self-insure, can we even afford to do so? If the average cost of a breach for a large organization, I don't know, we came up with something closer to $100 million. And if you're in a smaller organization, even if it's $1 million, what does $1 million mean to your organization? And if it's $500,000, what does that mean to your organization? And what's the cost of the insurance to insure against that? So I think you need to look at it. The premiums have come way down. And I think it's time for everyone to embrace the need to at least evaluate it, for sure.
Thank you. Don't see any additional questions coming through. So
I think there is another question, Tracy, about the cloud. I mean, I just read that.
Yeah, I think we only touched a little bit on the cloud, but that really gets to your third-party risk management. We've talked little bits about it, but Nasir, it looks like you want to add.
There's a specific question from Raj. when your cloud service provider does not want to give you RTO and RPO as a part of a BCP, business continuity plan, although there is a redundancy built in, how much resilience? So there's a question from Raj regarding a little bit more specific about RPO and RTO. So Raj, what I will tell you, is when you go in a cloud, there are two parts. So one is infrastructure, the another one is application. Application is your responsibility in general. Infrastructure is your cloud provider. Your cloud provider can give you a RTO and RPO for infrastructure, but they won't give you for your application because you are managing your application unless they manage it. So, for example, Amazon or Google will not give you that, but if you go a middleman like a Snowflake, they may give you the recovery point both for application as well as for the time. So in a short period of time, I can give you this answer. But if you need more detailed discussion, you can reach out to me through Tracy or through LinkedIn, whatever. And that's the area we have done quite a bit of work. And I'm not offering any service. I just wanted to make sure you get the full answer you need.
Yeah, and to add to that, we touched on it earlier. It's your contract that drives your relationship with your vendor. And so if RTO and RPO are critical to your business, then they need to be an element of your contract. And if they're not, then you need to revisit your contract and start those discussions with your vendors. So if your contract says there's nothing about RTO and RPO, then you didn't contract for an RTO and RPO with them. And if you need to have that discussion, then you need to revisit your contract potentially, because it's your contract that drives the relationship. And so start there and then open the discussion from there.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And again, thanks to Joe, Nasir, and I think Kent hopped off already, but we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for the opportunity, and it was a great to be part of this panel. Joe, thank you, and Kent. I'll extend my thanks to him too. Thank you.
Excellent. And then for all the attendees, you will be receiving a survey afterwards. So we'd really appreciate if you took a couple minutes to fill it out. I think there's only about 6 or 7 questions on it, so it won't take long. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.